Hi there, just a video, really an introduction or an overview of this XL table saw I've just bought. I think there's only one or two other videos and a manufacturer's video showing assembly on there, so I thought it worthwhile doing because it appears to be quite a good saw on the surface. It's exceeded my expectations, and it's definitely as good as it looks good in the pictures from the manufacturer or supplier. And it is an off-brand of but it doesn't seem to be overly generic, because very often you find these generic off-brand saws, they're just the same saw with a different label on them, but I've not found any of this style. It's very I suppose DeWalt-esque. Is it the 7945, you know, with the frame and the rubber feet on the corners? So it's very, very similar to that. I'm not saying it's as good as that. It was £140 delivered, 210mm blade, which is capable of doing 70mm at 90 degrees and 50mm at 45 degrees. I know some people buy these saws really for almost when they use them like a cabinet saw. They got into woodwork as a hobby. I don't use that. This is a tool I use for renovation and what have you, and really it's to replace this one, which I've had for I think it's probably 20 years. I bought it to do a laminate flooring job, so I only wanted a cheap saw. It was just for ripping up laminate boards down, and I've had it for 20 years. And actually, to be quite honest, I think it was £90 from B&Q. I think it's called I think it was called a Power Pro, but where the sticker's gone. And it had it's got an outrun table here, and it had a wing. It has a wing that goes on the left and a wing that goes on the right, but they're bracketed on, and they were just a pain in the backside to take on and off. The main it's been reasonably accurate. The first thing I did, and we'll talk about the XL in a minute, any of these cheap saws, is go and put a decent blade on it. This is a through blade. This is 254, so a lot bigger blade than the other one, but funny enough, it only has the same capacity. And even the fence, it's not brilliant, but it was, once it was set up square, it's reasonably stiff. So I say that's done me proud for about 20 years. But a little bit of wear and tear setting in, and it's got some play in some of the pins down here, and the blade has started to tramp a little bit when you're cutting thick wood. So you cut in 4x2, trimming it down, making a furring strip, and it's the blade has started to tramp a little bit as you're cutting, which is a bit unnerving. But apart from that, it's fine. Obviously not very portable. It's bolted on the legs, and that was another reason. It ends up being in the shed in the garden, and I just have to literally lift it 8 feet out in the shed, do what I want, and put it back in. But there's some interior work going on here where I'm actually going to really need the saw inside, especially when the winter comes. So anyway, enough of the old saw. Let's talk about the new saw. So I'm not sure, hasn't actually got the model number on the description there, on the label there, but you can see it's got a 500 watt motor, and it says about the capacities there. Simple controls, just unlocks here, and you can swing the blade up to 45 degrees. There are adjustable stops, and if we look inside here, you can actually adjust. There's one right down the bottom there, you can adjust the bottom there. I say 500 watt motor. I've ripped a couple of bits of wood through with the standard blade, and it seems to have enough power. It's fine, but my goodness, it's loud. And I'm not saying it's any louder than the Bosch or DeWalt, I've just not heard those. But that old machine I had over the other side, that hadn't got a gearbox. That was like a Poly-V, a multi-V belt, so that was quite nice. That other old machine, quite quiet, whereas this is definitely going to need ear defenders, and it would definitely wake up the neighbours if you start up at 6 o'clock outside on a Sunday morning. So yes, one of the reasons I bought it was the weight. It's about 14 kilos according to the label. The equivalent, DeWalt and Bosch do a 216. I think it's a GTS 216 and the DeWalt 7945. They're getting on. They're over 20 kilos. I think the Bosch one's about 22 kilos, and that's heavy. We've got 3 floors here. If you're doing work and lugging it up there, this is 14 kilos. The other thing I like about this, which I liked about the DeWalt with the frame, it's got this handle here, and you can actually pick the machine up and stand it on its edge. So if you want to put it in the van or what have you, it makes storage easy. It's easy to carry up and down stairs or steps, and it's easy to store. You can store it on its edge, and when it's on its edge, it rests on that bumper there, and there's some little rubber bumpers on here. Yeah, so it's got an extending, it's not a rack and pinion like the Bosch, but it's got an extending slides. Oh, we've just taken that off. Extending slides. So this slides out and back with the relative scales. I need to work out exactly what means what on this. So it slides out, and it appears to be fairly smooth. Okay, not too bad. The fence isn't bad. It doesn't hook around like the other one. It just sits on the top, which means you can take it off relatively quickly. But it clamps both in here and at the back. And if we look, it pulls it down pretty well. If you see that, so it's really it is really rigid when it's on. Right, okay, so what else can we tell you about it? Let's talk about a couple of the little negatives, I suppose. When you've got the blade wound all the way down, the riving knife stays up, so it doesn't go flush. I have actually managed to store this underneath. There doesn't seem to be an obvious spot to store this, so whether they intend for you to leave this on there, but it will. I've managed to sort of get it to, it's going to be difficult one-handed, but you can effectively clip it underneath there out of the way. So whether that's their intention, I don't know. Comes with a cross slide, little storage spot for that, and a nice wide T-slot on it. Okay, and actually, whoops, we'll tangle up here. It's about the same as anything else. There's actually a, not that I've put it on yet, oops, there's actually a little fence to put on that, so that's quite nice. So you can do cross cuts. This bit here, if I can do it with my fingernail, is plastic, and it has got a little bit of flex, but I think that could be solved by either filling that with epoxy, or epoxying or gluing a strip of metal up in that bit there. I think that'll stiffen up. Funny enough, the other side, this side, which has only got one, I think it's this overhang here, this has only got one stiffener on it. The left hand side's fairly stiff. Blade down there, the spanners for the blade are underneath there. The first thing I'm going to do, I've given it a couple of rip cuts with it to try it out, but the first thing I did with that other cheap machine is I'm going to put a decent blade in this, okay, and that'll make a lot of difference how the machine works. So my next video, I'll do a couple of cuts with the old blade, and then I'll swap it to the new blade, and I'll show you what it's like cutting with the new blade. It's got dust extraction, obviously. It's got a guard that goes on here, okay, so if you're going to use that and the dust extraction at the back, use that. You're going to have to have some sort of T-piece with those, but it's got a sprung loaded screw on here so you don't lose it, and it's sort of like an opaque finish, but it's pretty robust, to be quite honest. It's definitely better than the plastical guards I've got on my Metabo chop saw. So there's an adapter that goes on here to allow you to connect to the vacuum cleaner. Oh yes, so it looks as if you take that screw out and you could permanently, attach that. But it does mean it sticks. Yeah, it's not too bad actually, and it would go in a bit further. Actually, it probably wouldn't stick out the back. So dust extraction, not tried that yet. But when we try sawing with a new blade, all these are sort of plastic corners with button screws with nuts on, but the actual feet underneath are actually like rubber inserts. So if I grab it on here, it's on a Black & Decker Workmate here, you can see it's actually fairly grippy and it's wobbling the Workmate, so not too bad. But if you're doing long lengths, you might want to clamp it down. So I've explained the riving knife doesn't go all the way down. I've explained or mentioned that I think it's their intention, but it doesn't really seem to go on there quite properly to store it underneath, because you'd end up with these sticking out. I have to have a see about that. So the other thing I was going to mention, there's no obvious spot to underneath to store the guard. No obvious spot. So there must be. So you're going to have to keep that in a box or something. There's a cord wrap here to put the lead on. There's the motor underneath there. There's some of the gearing. All turns nice and smooth. They've got. I might take some of that grease off there. It's a bit excessive. It's just going to get clamped up with sawdust anyway. So the motor, aluminium housing, aluminium case gearbox, and the blade support on that seems to be an alloy housing. The top's aluminium, and obviously aluminium mounting blocks attaching that to the table. Look at the motor, it just looks like a circular saw motor. I wouldn't say tiny, but not that big. Another little bit of a negative, I suppose, if you like, is all these saws, the new saws like Bosch and DeWalt, come with a nice big flap on here to hit the stop button, and you can find yourself, it was the same with that other one, you can find yourself fumbling around underneath here. But I think, as that other review guy said, he said you could probably make yourself something, a flap to go on here. So compared, I wasn't sure whether I think it's GTS 216, the Bosch one with it's like got a plastic apron underneath here, whether that could actually be stored on its side, which is what I want to do, and be able to carry it on its side. The next model up was the GTS 10J, which is their 250mm or 254mm saw, which is on a frame like this, but I think it was 26 kilos, which is the weight of a bag of cement. I cannot imagine trying to move that about a lot. And as I said, my use is slightly different. Perhaps some people look at these table saws, they set them in the workshop, they set them into a bench, and they want to use them as an alternative to a cabinet saw. This isn't my intention with this. This is to be used for general building purposes, like I use the other one. So I had a pretty good idea what I wanted, because I'd had that other cheaper one for years, and actually I just wanted something a little bit better, a bit better on dust extraction, a bit more portable, which is why I've upgraded. And knowing how often I use it, to be quite honest, I can easily go 9 months without even, or 12 months sometimes, without even getting that other saw out the shed to do anything, because you're not on those sort of jobs. So spending nigh on the smaller Bosch is 320, the bigger Bosch, as cheap as I could find it, is 400. To spend between 320 and £400 on a saw. When it gets used a lot, if you know what I mean, because you're on a job putting the floor down or laying a floor. But all those other times when it's just sitting there not being used, I couldn't quite justify that. Different for people who are doing it as a hobby, and their woodwork hobby, and they want it set up in the workshop. That is different. I'd rather spend that difference in money on tools or hand tools that I use all the time. Anyhow, so anyway, it was really to give you overall impressions. Build quality fine. I've not seen the Bosch or DeWalt in the flesh, but looking at the build, I do like nice tools. I've got a lot of Metabo, fairly nice Metabo chop saw. Everything else I've got tends to be Bosch, the blue Bosch, and I've got a couple of DeWalt things because I couldn't get them in the Bosch. But overall, I think for the money, bang for your buck, as they say, I think it's really, really good value. And I've had a quick check with a square, and it seems pretty near out of the box. But obviously, I might need to finesse a little bit of, adjust it a little bit to get it perfect. Forgot to mention, it's got onboard storage for a push stick. Okay, so it goes in that little slot there. What else came in the box? No, nothing really. Oh yes, there is a plastic. There is this plastic doofer which goes on the edge of the. Put it on the edge of here. There's a couple of wing nuts they give you to go on there, and it goes on there. So you can cut narrow strips, so you're not too close to the blade. Whoops, knocking stuff off. So that's about it. Yeah, it's not as well. There's an example. I've knocked that on the floor. Not broken. No, it's fairly tough plastic. The other thing was, sorry, I'm just remembering things as I go along. It has got the grab handles here, so you can carry it flat if you want to, and they're like a molded in handle screw on. It's got and I mentioned about the handle the other side. I think overall, as I just mentioned, it's really good value for money. No, it's not as, looking at the reviews and what I've seen in the DeWalt, and actually the DeWalt and Bosch, they've both got pros and cons, and it's not as nice as the rack system. Everybody seems to love the rack system for this extending table. Everybody loves that on the DeWalt. A lot of people complain or mention with the Bosch that it doesn't this doesn't lock down well enough on the Bosch, and sometimes it doesn't lock square. This seems to lock fairly square. It's got this straight edge on the back there, and all what I do is push. When I lock it down, it only needs one hand. Push that forward so it's locked up in the slot, and push that down, and you can see if we line it up with one of these slots here, you can see it is pretty straight, pretty darn straight. The only thing I would say is the pack. You get a Bosch, and it's in such when they ship it, the equipment is in such a tough box. This is typically sent out in the thin, I wouldn't say the thinnest cardboard you can imagine, but I'm amazed the stuff actually survived. It did have a polystyrene base in here to protect it, and a top. The only thing I had, I polished them out a bit, there was a big hole in the side of the box, and there was some score marks or scratch marks on this, which isn't going to affect its use. And to be quite honest, I don't even know that might have been original, as in when it was packed in the box it was like it. Anyway, I think that's enough for now. The next one will be when I've actually used it. Cheers.